welcome to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about how God turns nothing into something, and we'll find new joy inside of the creation story. Let's go. Hey everybody, it's that Sunday School Girl of thatsundayschoolgirl.com. Welcome to the lesson for Sunday, September 2nd. I pray that God is blessing you wherever your feet touch this week. If you can tell from my background, if you've been with me for a while, you know that I am at Mom's house. So I'm in Kansas City this week, but I am having a wonderful week, and I'm so excited to be here with you to share another great Sunday school lesson. But it's not just another great lesson. This is Happy New Year in Sunday School, because September starts our new Sunday school year. And so by now, I hope that you have your new books, your new commentaries. But just in case you don't, feel free to pause the video now and go ahead and look for the link below and download your TSSG notes. So you'll have everything that you need. You even have my secret notes and the diary of my study, if you will. But you'll also have all of the scripture information for this lesson. Also, if you'll check out the TSSG app, you will have the daily readings for this week. If you're new around here, welcome. You have just joined the largest cyber community of Sunday school students on the World Wide Web. This is also the most liked Sunday school review on YouTube, and I am so happy that you are here. Everyone, just stop. Make sure you've done this. Make sure that you have clicked the subscribe button. You don't want to miss content when it's uploaded on the channel, and you have to take a second step. There's a button that looks like a bell, and that's what gives you the immediate notification by email when content is uploaded. Hey, before we get into the lesson, I want to share two upcoming events with you. I am so honored to be a speaker at both of these events, so I'm going to be in your area. If you are in the Dallas, Texas area, I want to invite you on Saturday, September the 8th, to the Greater Conference. The Greater Conference is sponsored by Elisa Alexander, and if you feel something on the inside that's kind of pulling you, and you know there has to be something more to life, there's something bigger in your assignment, something God is calling you to do, the Greater Conference is for you. And here's the flyer. It gives you more information on it, and I'll also post it on my Facebook page. Secondly, if you're in the Kansas City area, surrounding area, Kansas City, Kansas, Missouri, Topeka, Lawrence, anywhere in that area, I invite you on Monday, September 10th, to join me at the Kansas East Church of God in Christ Women's Leadership Conference. The conference is centered around team building, and if you're looking for ways to better build your team, especially as you're looking for God to expand the territory and the impact that you're making in the kingdom, this conference is going to be great, and I invite you to be there. And here's the flyer for it as well. I'm going to post it on my page, and you can get the additional information there. As I said, Sunday School, Happy New Year. Grab your books, grab your pens, download those TSSG notes. It's time for us to get into the lesson. Our lesson title is God Created the Heavens and Earth. The Bible basis is Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 13. The Bible truth. Genesis 1 informs us that God is the creator of all these marvelous wonders. Our memory verses are verses 1 and 2. And the lesson aim is that we will know that God alone, through the divine spoken word, created an amazing and wondrous universe. Sense the importance of being part of God's awesome creation, and celebrate God's creation through praise and prayers of thanksgiving. Our first lessons of this quarter cause us to focus on God as our creator. Now, I am positive that you, just like I did, looked at this and said, Genesis 1, I know that story. But I had to tell myself the same thing you've heard me say before, and I'm going to ask you to keep this in mind as we go through the next 4 weeks' lessons, that we cannot look at this story with a familiar eye, because God is always causing us to see something new in His Word. But more importantly, as we grow and as we mature, His Word should resonate with us in very different ways. And I'm telling you, I hope this video doesn't go too long, because I really was excited and I found the joy, if you will, in this creation story as we're working through this. A few weeks back, many of you remember that I went to Puerto Rico and I took pictures there, and I told you just how much I love the beach. And it's not just the relaxation of the beach, but usually when I'm at properties that have large bodies of water, I am just fascinated with the idea of creation and how God created the earth, and thinking about the fact that the earth itself is more than 70% water, yet when I'm standing on the beach, he does not allow the water to go past a certain point, that he, by his word, created a boundary that allows the water not to overtake us. And that is so fascinating to me. And I thought about that even looking at this week's lesson, which is taking us through the first 3 days of creation. We are in Genesis chapter 1. And we are in one of the first books of the Bible, in fact, the first book, but the first 5 books of the Bible are credited to Moses as the writer. And its purpose is to document or to preserve the testimony of God. If you look at the word Genesis, its origin is Greek and it means beginning. So we're looking at the beginning. Now, my teaching tip of the week is really going to be for all classes, but particularly if you teach young people and millennials in particular, young adults. There are a lot of conversations and a lot of theories around creation. And so I encourage you to build your brain around some of those, look at things and be familiar with the Big Bang Theory and others that you will see. Not because you're promoting those theories, but you want to be able to speak to some of them as you're looking at this inside, and those conversations may come up. And we as teachers, we as holders of the word, need to be prepared for those conversations, and particularly with young people, to prepare them in a way that allows them to respond in conversation when these things are presented to them in other forums. Because lots of people are talking about the world and how it was formed, but we as people of God accept the creation story through the word of God as it's given. In Genesis, again, we see the beginnings, the beginning of a lot of things. This is the beginning of the world. It's the beginning of man and God's interaction with man. The beginning of evil, languages, nations, lies, marriage, deceit. We first know of the Messiah, the beginning, a new beginning even after the flood, the beginning of the nation of God's people. So it is truly a book of beginnings. And it is a foundational book. It's necessary to understand Genesis before you even jump into the rest of the word. In fact, Genesis is quoted in the New Testament more than 200 times. What we accept as foundation is that God created all things. And again, this lesson is going to take us through the first 3 days of creation. And it tells us a lot about God and who he is. But most of all, I keep telling you that I find the joy in this lesson because there is such an assurance of God and his plan. But most of all, the fact that he's thinking about us and we can depend on him. Our printed text begins in verse 1 of chapter 1. And again, you're going to need your pen. Get your highlighters out because these short words and phrases, don't just read them like you know them, but look at them and think about what you're seeing. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Let's look at that. In the beginning, right there, that's enough right there to have some conversation about, because you can't go any further back than the beginning. This is the origin. This is the starting point. What we know is that we have a beginning. What we don't know is when was the beginning. If you also look at these words, in the beginning, that's exactly how John begins writing in the New Testament. In the beginning was the word. I found that interesting. I also note in most lessons our cast of characters. And in the beginning, we have one name mentioned. God was there. In the beginning, we see the presence of God. He has no beginning. He has no ending. We see God. If you look at Psalm 90:2, the psalmist writes, before the mountains were born, you gave birth to the earth and the world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Now, God written here is translated Elohim. It is the plural form of God, which lets us know that the Trinity is present. The Father, the Son, and the Spirit of God are present. God is self-existent. He is not created by anyone or anything. Again, he is the cause of creation, but he himself is uncaused. He is self-existent. It was God's choice to create. There are scientific theories that suggest that order came out of chaos, but what we're seeing in Genesis 1 is that this is an intentional design by God. The scene at this point is dark, it's desolate, it's non-distinct. You can't tell one thing from the other. And God takes all of this nothingness and he makes something out of it. He makes something out of nothing. And you may run across this word in your study. Thank you, Pastor Davis. I remember this one. It's the ex nihilo of God, to take nothing and make something out of it. Verse 2 tells us this, that there was no form to the earth. It was empty. There was nothing in it. It was dark on the face of the earth. And God moved upon the face of the waters. God basically was sitting and looking at all of the material that he created for heaven and earth, and now had to find a way to put it all together. It did not have structure. One of my ahas here is that God creates his own material. He does not need our material. He creates all the matter that's needed for his own success. When he spoke, matter came into being. Everything that he would need to form every part of the earth was existent by his word. Note this as well, and I underline this. The Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters. Here we clearly see the Spirit of God is present from the beginning. Pay close attention to the condition of the earth. It's dark, barren, desolate, and empty, and yet the Spirit of God is present. And not stagnant, not in one place. The Spirit is hovering. It's moving over the face of the waters. This made me think about our own lives. When our lives seem dark, barren, desolate, and empty, this is an assurance that God's Spirit, God's presence is still with us and moving over us. David wrote it this way in Psalm 139. God's Spirit is ever present and everywhere. Where can I go that your Spirit cannot find me? So we note here that the Spirit is present and involved in creation. We have the assurance that his Spirit is always with us. Verse 3, God begins to speak. And I underlined in this lesson, every time God speaks and there was a reaction, God caused things to be by his word. This barren and empty earth, God did not leave it like that. And just like that in our lives, when we're barren and empty, God does not leave us in that way. He can speak and cause things to be different. God is both light and he is the light of the world. We know that from John chapter 1, verse 4. And here in verse 3, light overcomes darkness. He creates light. He says, let there be light, and there was light. Again, God's design is thoughtful. He speaks and things happen. By his word, things come into existence. There was no such thing as light. So why would light even be needed? Was it necessary for God? Absolutely not. But God knew his intentional plan. He knew that this was all about his idea to create man. It was in his mind to create man. And in order to do that, he needed to set the canvas in a way that man could live, that man could be successful. And man cannot live in darkness. Very naturally, if we didn't have our light, we would run into things. And spiritually, if we didn't have light, we would have no guidance. And so God called something into existence that did not exist before. He spoke it and he caused it to be so. Again, note the pattern in the creation story, that there is a command, there is something performed, and there's an outcome. And God saw the light, verse 4, and it was good. I also highlighted every time you see it was good. That told me, and it tells me, that there are times in our lives that we have to pause and evaluate the plan that we had, the action that we took, the outcome, and we should be able to know whether it met a standard. And here God set his own standard, and he evaluated his own work, and he met his own standard of good. I also consider this sort of a celebration, and I think about the fact that we have to learn to pause and celebrate when something has just been good. So verse 4, he celebrates that it was good, and he divided the light from the darkness, and he gives the light a name, and he calls it day, and he gives the darkness a name, and he calls it night. Again, this is the first period of time that we know as a day, truly a 24-hour period of time. And note that God makes a distinction from night to day. He separates light from darkness. He separates day from night. These are boundaries. He's telling the darkness that you can only go so far. He tells light that you can only go so far. So again, we see these boundaries, and God has this pattern of separating. Even when he formed his own people, he separated them. He made a difference in them. He didn't form them even through blessing. They were formed through a period of suffering. But his time of separation happened even in Egypt when he made them different from others. So he puts boundaries and he separates. And here he called those boundaries day and night. In verses 6 through 8, God speaks again, and there's more division. This time it deals with the water. At this point, the earth is all water. There's light, there's darkness, but it's all water. So the first division of water is vertical. There's a division between the waters above and the waters below. And that creates this space that you and I live in. It's the place that man would be able to dwell. In verses 9 and 10, the waters are divided again. And this is the first time we see dry land. Land had not existed before. Again, God speaks, and something that wasn't there is there. And I noted that it was dry land. All of this water, suddenly God speaks, and his word is powerful enough not only to create a boundary now where water does not overtake the land, but his word was powerful enough to take all of the moisture out of the land. It didn't say that there was mud everywhere, but God created dry land, a place where man could live. And this all happens immediately at his word. In verse 11, God speaks again. And when he speaks this time, now we have water, we have dirt, dry land everywhere, and it's probably not that appealing. There's just brown or red land, depending on what color your dirt is. And for as far as the eye can see, there is nothing attractive. There's nothing here to sustain man. Man does not survive on dirt and water. And God then makes a provision. There is nothing, and God speaks again. When he speaks this time, vegetation springs up. And if you look at the language of it, it's immediate that there is a natural beauty which begins to happen. There's color. There are sights. When we look at the vegetation around us, my mother is a gardener, and here's a picture of her garden. She has vegetables and literally a garden in the backyard. And here's the front. She loves to landscape on the front. And so that's what this made me think of. And there are sights and sounds and smells that go along with landscaping. And we see that here when God creates this vegetation in the earth. There's grass and the herb, and I noted this, yielding seed. This is part of a plan. The herb is yielding seed. It is purposeful and it is full of wisdom. There are seeds. That means that this earth is intended to do something continuous. It is intended to replenish, to populate. There is an act of multiplication that's going to take place. It will multiply after its own kind. That's what a seed does. And you see where this is ultimately going. God is already, again, making provision for man even before man is created. And when we see seeds, when we see gardens, when we see vegetation, we should always be reminded of God's faithfulness. That as long as there is seed, there is product, there is growth. And when something reproduces after its own kind, it produces to be like its parent. Whatever the parent seed is, things produce after the parent seed. And we'll see that pattern continue in creation. We're wrapping up verses 12 and 13. The earth does just that. It brings forth grass, again yielding seed after its own kind. The trees yield fruit, and the seed itself after his kind. And here again is a celebration. God evaluated what was done, and he saw that it was good. And this is the end of the third day. We're going to pause right here because, again, we've got 4 weeks in Genesis. But I told you that this lesson excited me because this wasn't just about rehearsing a creation story or reciting the order in which things are done. But what was exciting for me are my key learnings for this week, and here they are. The first is that there is joy to be found in the creation story. This is not just reading the encyclopedia or just skimming over a familiar Bible story, but realizing that God has sovereign power and that he is faithful, and from the very beginning, he was clear and intentional in his design, and that should cause a joy to spring up in us. God is the originator. He is eternally existent. And most of all, he is timeless. This was one of my favorite things, that nothing obeys God. God took nothing, gave nothing instruction, and nothing obeyed and became something. He took nothing and made it something. And when I look at our lives, the fact that we have nothing to bring but ourselves, God takes our nothingness, our emptiness, our barrenness, our darkness, and he makes something wonderful, something awesome out of it. If you think about the first miracle of Jesus, he took water in its nothingness and he made something out of it. He made wine out of it. So even if you feel like you have nothing to offer to God, you brought enough for him to work with. When you feel barren and empty, remember the Spirit of God is hovering. He's always present. He's nearby. It is a joy to know that God's Spirit is always with us. Next is that a word from God can cause things to come into existence in our lives. Things that are not can be by just one word from God. He can cause it to be so. I noted that God made choice to create, and in doing so, he had a purpose in creation. He created all things for his pleasure. His pleasure is the reason that they are and were created. That's Revelation 4:11. But even inside of his design, he created things both for our need and for our pleasure. And we in turn enjoy God through seeing what he has created. God speaks to us through the world around us. Finally, learn to celebrate. Note that every time God created, he stepped back and he looked at what he had done and he said, that's good. And there is nothing wrong with taking those moments in your life, not to make anything great of yourself, but to look at what God has allowed, the expertise that he's allowed you to have, to step back and pause and tell God, thank you for empowering you, and to say, that moment was good. God celebrated his own success. He celebrated the things that he had done intentionally and purposefully. And again, he created all things and he created them well. We have so much more to go in this story of creation. Again, I don't want to be the spoiler alert for the next few weeks, but you want to jump in here. This is going to be a great series of study for us. Don't forget to share this lesson. If it's been valuable, please give me the thumbs up like. And whatever nuggets you're getting out of the lesson, drop them down below. I want to read what you're finding, what you found interesting. In fact, list one of your key learnings for me this week. Share back with me in the comments below. Give me one of your personal key learnings from this week's lesson. That's it for me. I've got to run. I hope that you all have a fantastic week. I will see you in Sunday school. Bye, everybody.